Welcome back. If you're here from part 1 and part 2, something in you already knows this isn't just a story anymore. This is a process, a psychological unraveling, and a quiet rebuilding that most people never talk about. Because after the dark night of the soul, something unexpected happens. You don't just go back to normal. Normal doesn't return. Instead, you enter a strange phase that almost no one prepares you for. Stillness. Not peace at first, not joy. Stillness. And at the beginning, it feels uncomfortable because your mind is used to chaos. Your identity was built inside noise. Your sense of self was reinforced through doing, reacting, becoming, proving. So when all of that collapses, the silence can feel like emptiness. But it isn't emptiness. It's recalibration. And this is where most people get confused.
Because they think the dark night ends when the pain stops. But in reality, it ends when your relationship to yourself changes. Let me explain that more clearly. Before the breakdown, you were identified with your thoughts. If your thoughts were anxious, you were anxious. If your thoughts were uncertain, you became uncertainty. If your thoughts were lost, you believed you were lost. There was no separation. Thought equals identity. But something shifts after the collapse. You begin to notice something subtle. You are the one observing the thoughts, not the thoughts themselves. And that gap, that small space of awareness, changes everything. Because for the first time you realize you are not what is happening in your mind. You are what is aware of it. This is where psychological integration begins. Not in fixing yourself, but in disidentifying from the false self you were fused with. And this is why the dark night feels like a death. Because in a way, it is. Not your physical death, but the death of the constructed identity, the one built on approval, the one built on relationships, the one built on achievement, the one built on being someone. That version of you doesn't survive this process, and what remains is something quieter, less reactive, less performative, less desperate. At first, you might think something is missing, but what's actually happening is subtraction. Life is removing what was never stable enough to carry you, and underneath all of it, something has always been there. A presence, a baseline awareness, a witness. Not loud, not emotional, not dramatic, just steady. And the deeper you rest into that, the more the psychological noise begins to lose authority. You still feel emotions, but they no longer define you. You still have thoughts, but they no longer control you. You still experience fear, but it no longer becomes your identity. This is what most people call awakening. But it's not mystical in the way people imagine. It is deeply psychological. It is the end of unconscious identification and the beginning of conscious presence. Now, here's something important I need you to understand. You don't become a new person after the dark night. You stop performing the one you were conditioned to be. And what emerges is not an upgraded identity. It is authenticity without effort. You begin to notice. You don't need to convince anyone. You don't need to prove anything. You don't need to constantly define yourself. You just are. And strangely, that becomes enough. Relationships begin to change, not because you force them to, but because you are no longer abandoning yourself inside them. Work changes too, not because you chase something new, but because you stop tolerating what disconnects you from yourself. Even your inner world changes, because the war inside you starts to quiet. Not because life is perfect,
but because you are no longer fighting every internal experience. And this is the paradox most people miss. Healing doesn't feel like becoming more. It feels like becoming less attached, less identified, less defended, less fragmented, until what remains is simple awareness. And from that awareness, life begins to reorganize itself. Not around fear, not around survival, but around truth. So if you're still in the middle of your dark night, or just coming out of it, understand this. Nothing is wrong with your confusion. It is the mind losing its old reference points. Nothing is wrong with your emptiness. It is identity dissolving. Nothing is wrong with your silence. It is awareness becoming dominant for the first time. You are not broken. You are being restructured at the deepest level. And what comes after this is not a return to who you were. It is the first time you meet who you are without distortion. Not as a role, not as a story, but as presence itself. And that is the real awakening.